In episode 14, we talked about heaven and the idea that heaven is not a place, but rather a state of awareness that we as individuals can experience here on Earth. In this episode, we'll talk about what that means and the ways that our speech and habits of perception and behavior can either assist or hinder the establishment of heaven on Earth. We hope you enjoy. What I was sort of toying with this morning was this idea that Earth was always the garden, and we are just so accustomed to perceiving it from our modern technological standpoint that we miss the fact that we live in this miraculous ecosystem where everything is provided for us. And you don't think about this when you go to the store and you pick some fruit off the shelf to put in your basket, or unless you're a person who raises your own food, we're kind of removed from the miraculousness of how those things are presented to us in this environment. And anyway, the reason I thought about this is because I had grown this watermelon in my garden after planting some seeds 6 months ago. And it took forever for the vines to kind of wander and do what they were going to do. And plus, it was really hot. But finally, one morning I go out, and there had been nothing there the day before. And all of a sudden, there was a baby watermelon about the size of a kiwi. And it just kind of struck me how it had appeared out of nowhere. It didn't rely on my surveying it and sort of checking carefully on all the blooms every day. It just was there. And then within a week, it was, 5 times the size. And then it was a supermarket sized watermelon. And delicious, by the way. And, it just struck me that how could this not be heaven if whole watermelons just kind of appear out of thin air? And so, because as a society, we're so kind of removed by our technology and the fact that we have logistical systems that bring our food to us and fulfill whatever needs that we have, we kind of assume that it's all man-made, and that if those systems weren't in place, that we wouldn't actually be provided with everything on this planet. And yet our ancestors, millennia ago, were basically just living off the land. So I think that's a very long way of circling back to the idea that, we don't name this earth that we live on. We don't name it heaven. And perhaps we should, perhaps we should start from there to say that, hey, everything that we need on this planet, this beautiful, miraculous marble with water and air and everything that sustains us, we should name that heaven and then treat it accordingly, rather than assuming that man has made all of this.
Yeah. What a point, right? What's at the center of things? It's sort of like
Mhm.
we have this remarkable arrogance to believe that that humans are at the center of things, or that we individually as egos are at the center of things, that our human creations are at the center of things. I mean, this is exemplified in our ideas about progress, right?
Mhm.
That we humans are going to make things better. Now,
Right.
of course, in some arenas, that's quite sensible. It's great that we can build a house that shelters us, that won't fall down, for
Right. Right.
150 years. That's great. But this arrogance of believing that we have to generate something better than what's already delivered to us. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. And that we have this arrogance right now, like right in this common era, of thinking that we are not only at the pinnacle of human evolution right now, but that we will be going ever higher, right?
uh,
Where and this is, we're not really taught a lot about our history, like our very, very ancient history in school, unless you specifically study those things. And one of the things I've learned in studying, the ancient sacred texts is just how advanced in terms of philosophy and understanding that, for example, the ancient yogis were. They knew
mhm.
things with far more depth and, I would dare say, accuracy on a spiritual level,
Mm, yes,
or just on the level of truth and logos, than what we do nowadays, because we have such a reliance on the technologies that the brain has made, that the mind has made, that man has implemented to try to manage what we think needs managing, when in fact nature just takes
right.
care of itself if we leave it, to its own devices.
Right. We spoke of the Tao in talking about the word. And one of the things that the Tao is so exquisite in teaching is that the natural order of things is perfect. It's in balance. And it only goes out of
Yeah.
balance when we disrupt that, when we mess with it. And what you're speaking to reminds me of one of my favorite phrases for this is borrowing it from a book by Terence McKenna is the archaic revival, and this
Mm.
remembrance of our ancient heritage of understanding that included a way of life and a relationship to nature, but it also included things like the mythologies that built cultures, or that informed cultures. And we look at mythologies
Mm.
like, for example, a common view of the Bible is that it's just a bunch of superstitious nonsense that a bunch of people organized, put together, and then duped themselves into believing. It's
Right.
like, do we really think that's what has happened for 2,000 years? That people were just too stupid to realize that the Bible was,
Mhm.
you know, that they were just too stupid. They thought it was all literal and that, they're primitives. It's like, no, no, we've forgotten that these ancient stories like the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible or any of the great things that have been passed on through millennia are informing us about our relationship to the natural world. And if we throw that away thinking that we are progressed, we are doing the very opposite. We're going backwards.
Right.
Or
Right.
we're not only going backwards, we're divergent.
Yeah, I had an image of spiraling off into space somewhere, yeah, like, just, like,
Yeah,
totally off the path. Yeah,
right,
out of
right.
control.
And we see that. I mean, there's all we have to look at is how well is humanity working? How
Mhm.
well are our societies working?
Mhm.
Are people happy? Are people taken care of? And it's
Yeah,
clear,
not so much.
not so much. I think it's important when we talk about the natural world that we're not just talking about nature. We're not just talking about making sure there's enough forest and, growing your
Mhm.
food organically. And those things are all very beautiful and necessary, but we're really talking about something that is, consistent with the logos, the architecture of creation.
One thing that sticks with me, of course, is the quote from the Bible that, "Seek first the kingdom of God, and all else will be rendered unto thee." Which, from a sort of superficial reading, I think gets interpreted as prosperity and wealth by people, mistakenly. Whereas I'm starting to interpret that as this idea of the garden, as this idea that we were set down on this, or that humankind was gifted with this planet that is able to sustain everything that's needed, as long as we keep ourselves in step with or in alignment with the logos and the patterning of
Mm,
nature,
mm,
as intended, the things that the commandments are intended to guide us toward, or the yamas and niyamas. And what happens instead is that we think that we need, as I said earlier, we need to manage it somehow, and the brain wants to impose technology so that we can increase crop yields, I suppose, or provide entertainment. Whereas in the past, perhaps we would have congregated together and celebrated a harvest or something. And so now instead we're in our video games and our computers and devices and so forth. Which the more we do that, the more we're out of step with that logos, with that patterning, that if we found our way back to it, would put us right back in heaven where we've always been, but we've just lost our orientation to that. It's gotten horribly distorted and misused, and we cause ourselves suffering as a result of the fact that we almost refuse to see it.
yeah,
I think people get addicted to their suffering, they get addicted to complaint and criticism, and this idea that I'm not enough yet, I don't know enough yet, you're not enough yet, the world is still in need of fixing, as you alluded to earlier. And as we speak those things, we're not speaking heaven into being, we're speaking out of step with the logos, we're speaking in a way that's
yeah,
more likely to create a hellish existence or a hellish experience on earth.
yeah. It brings to mind the declaration that Friedrich Nietzsche made in the mid to late 1800s when he said, God is dead. And of course, we're talking more purely about Western civilization, I think, in this
Sure.
particular piece. But
Yeah.
he said, God is dead. And I think his reasoning behind that was that when the Protestant view developed that all you had to do was believe in Jesus Christ, that he had died for your sins and you were saved, you were just good.
Mm.
It took off this burden of having to bring our divinity into being.
Mm.
And he said something profound. I mean, this was in the I think 1860s when he said that. And he predicted that what would follow is that once we had dispensed with the idea that there was a personal responsibility to live in a way that's in accordance with divinity, that we would have to make up our own rules. And I think that what we're seeing as that divergence that you're speaking of, this departure from the natural world, is this idea that there isn't a higher ordering principle and that we are somehow in charge of making up the rules here. And human consciousness isn't developed enough to
Yes.
make a body of rules that are adequate to function successfully. And so we keep relying on our own intelligence, our own intellect specifically, for creating the rules as if we could better things.
Right. Yeah, ultimately, I mean, we can fool ourselves for a while into thinking that we're making things better, but, the unintended consequences inevitably come home to roost at some point. I mean, I guess that's one
Yeah.
interpretation of karma even is, when we get out of step, when we're not following that internal wisdom, that internal truth, that's always kind of there longing to be heard,
Yep.
but
Yep.
buried with our mental noise,
Yep.
then, stuff can go haywire.
Yeah. And let's make that unbelievably practical for a moment. Let's say that you are aware that certain foods make you feel bad,
Mhm.
and yet you don't stop eating them. You know what foods make you feel good. You know the foods that are healthy for you. You know to eat your vegetables and your fruits and what have you. You know what to eat, but you don't do it, right? And
Right.
the karma, the consequence, the effect of choosing that divergent way is that you continue to feel more and more awful.
Mhm, mhm.
And same thing with our search for happiness. It's like we don't look for happiness where it is. We look for happiness according to the formulas that we believe in.
Sure.
And despite all evidence that it doesn't ever work, we continue to pursue these paths of
Right.
believing this or this or this will bring happiness. And
Mhm.
it shows us that we're divergent from the pattern, which
Yeah.
shows us that we're out of sync.
I love that example of food because, we have such an emphasis on physical appearance in Western culture and bodybuilding and staying in shape and so forth, and look at the incredible pantheon of protein powders and supplements and all of these
Yeah.
manufactured foods, which, I'm not gonna sit here and judge them. I mean, I have taken them myself and they can be helpful, but they, in my experience, for example, protein powder, I take a little additional protein powder sometimes to kind of, keep my muscle mass up, and it does not really sit well in my system. And so I have to be very careful about how much of it I'm going to choose to
Right.
use. And, so trace that back to the source of difficulty, which is this assumption that, the shape of my muscles is somehow important to anybody but me, or to my ability to survive on this planet. And, since I don't have to chase down my own food or wrestle anyone for it, I don't necessarily need to maintain that. We do that with everything, appearance-wise,
Yeah.
the things we put on our hair and the things that we, apply to our bodies to try and keep the body from doing what it naturally would do, which is change over time.
Yes, I love your point here. It's like, okay, protein powder. Protein's good for you, especially this kind of protein, X, Y, or Z. And it's like, okay, so if I take protein, it makes me healthy. But here we have something that is unbelievably unnatural, a concentrated form of protein
Mhm.
derived from a source that you would never be able to get in any other natural form at all.
Exactly.
And yet, because we have this belief that the protein is good for us, we're willing to invest it with this almost, well, the Course in Miracles refers to it as the idea of magic, that there's
Mm.
a certain kind of magic that we place in
Oh,
this kind
sure.
of thinking that, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we develop a faith in this, and we develop a faith in the system that designed it, and we develop a faith in the results that are going to ensue.
Just think of all the snake oil salesmen that the world has known because people are unable I don't wanna make a gross generalization like that, but we have sort of a resistance to surrendering to time, and we want everything now. We want everything instantly. We want that thing to magically appear that's going to improve our life as though we're not already in heaven, right? So give me the cure, give me the pill, give me the magic elixir that's going to change
Mhm.
the thing that's troubling me rather than, what we could do, which is to delve into the much more organic sources of our discomfort, be they psychological, physical, or, societal.
There's a point you're making here that I think is really useful for a person to inquire into, which is maybe we're seeking the immediate solution because that's the intelligent thing to do. But maybe we're just wrong about what the immediate solution is. And
Mm,
this says a lot about what our aim is, like what we're looking at. When Christ says, "Seek first the kingdom of God, and all else will be added to you,"
mhm,
that's an immediacy. That's like right now, right here.
mhm,
Seek the kingdom of God.
mhm,
Right here, right now. Put your feet in heaven. And so I believe that there's actually some intelligence in that immediacy, that want, that desire for the solution right now, but we look to the wrong source for it.
mm. Wow, that's a really subtle point, but I see what you're saying.
It is. It is. Like, for example, we want happiness, but what we look to usually is our idea of what will bring that in the future rather
Mhm.
than what it is to be happy right now, right
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Thank you for making that point because I should correct myself then. It's not that we lack the patience.
Well, we also lack patience.
Well, true. We do lack patience. Oh my God, it gets so complicated when you start getting into time. But that's not the main problem because we're simply in the context of this conversation, we're simply overlooking heaven that could be and always is available to us in the moment, right here and now, as you said.
There's multiple dimensions when we talk about these things, and the dimension that you spoke of where we're looking for that quick fix, that's a worthwhile thing. That's an important thing for us to acknowledge because we do live in a fast food culture. And I
Mhm.
was in India back in 2008 with an Indian yogi. He said that the American people were the most difficult people to work with because they wanted everything immediately and they wanted
Mhm.
everything on their terms,
Mhm.
but they didn't want to do anything that was necessary to get the results that they were looking for.
Right, right.
And I think that speaks to your point here, which is this very arrogant, very narcissistic
Mhm.
approach to seeking meaning, to seeking happiness,
Yeah.
to seeking fulfillment. Well, let's consider heaven as a structural representation, a garden, if you will, that follows a blueprint, a pattern, which we've called the Word, the Logos. And let's consider that our human speech and action, for that matter, can build or design, or better, create inconsistency with that pattern or in harmony with that garden. And so our task, in some sense, is to speak and act in a way that is right. This is Buddha's notion of right action as well, in a way that represents reality as it really is, that is consistent with that underlying pattern, the logos, and that is consistent with this creation of heaven. I mean,
Y
when we talk about the generation of heaven on earth, what are we talking about but speech and action?
Right, or what we could term speaking heaven into existence, I think is how we referenced it in our last
Yeah.
episode.
Yes.
And we briefly touched on the idea that the symbolism of the cross represents the fact that the human being is at the intersection
Hmm.
between heaven and third dimensional reality. Am I saying that correctly?
Well, I would say it recently in group we referred to it as the crux, that we are the crux, which is cross.
Mhm,
And if we look at ourselves as having two dimensions, one spiritual and one, let's say, not quite material, let's call it human, right?
mhm,
We have one vertical spiritual dimension to ourselves and one human dimension to ourselves. And I would say that the vertical dimension is spiritual and the horizontal is human. It's what connects us here to earth, to each other.
right.
And that there's an intersection, right? There's
Mhm,
an intersection between the vertical and the horizontal. And at that intersection, we exist, right? Right there
mhm.
where X marks the spot.
Yes. So then
Mhm.
the nature of that intersection, the sort of energetic texture of it, whether it's tending toward the heavenly and the spiritual, or and being in alignment with the logos, or something else that's out of alignment, that's more hellish, is going to be influenced by the way we speak about it.
Yes, we will literally create the experience of heaven or the experience of hell, depending on whether we speak in consistency with truth, with reality. In other words, when I speak the truth as it really is, not just like my made up truth, but the truth as it really is,
Mhm.
I am emboldened, I am exalted, I am
Mhm.
made joyful and peaceful and alive and connected. I
Yes.
experience yoga in that way. That's the yoga of speech, is that the speech itself, being truthful, joins with that universal pattern, exemplifies heaven here.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many ways that you can visualize the thing that we're talking about. Like, you could look at this also as a pattern of waveforms where, our peaks and troughs of our speech or our actions or our behavior are either in alignment with the truth, the word, the logos, and reinforcing and amplifying those, or they're completely out of alignment, in which case they're being canceled out. So I think we've all seen this in physics
Yeah.
class, how that works.
In physics class, can you tell me what you mean? I'm not. I don't think I ever took physics.
Sure. If you throw a pebble into a pond, then there's a pattern of ripples that emanates out from it. If you throw another pebble into the other side of the pond, it also makes ripples that then approach each other. So you can imagine these approaching each other. Now, where the peaks and troughs meet at the same time, it will double in size and amplify. Where a
Okay.
peak from one
Okay.
meets the trough of another, they will cancel each other out, and instead you'll have a flat surface. So in the
Okay.
same way, I think about this a lot when I think about how people harmonize with each other or not. It's almost as though if someone has the sort of same orientation or wavelength that I do, and we come together and interact with each other, then we can either increase each other's energy that way, or we can, if someone is out of alignment,
Uh-huh.
then we'll tend to cancel each other out or come into disharmony, conflict, dissonance.
Uh-huh.
We can also look at it from the viewpoint that what we speak, the way we interpret anything that we're experiencing or trying to convey to another person, we can view it through a variety of lenses that are represented by words. So, something can be a holy
Mm.
war, or something can be a genocide. Something can be, you know what I'm saying? So there's
Uh-huh.
speech and right action will either reinforce the word, capital W, or negate it, cancel it out, come into disharmony with it.
Well, I think you're speaking something you as you were speaking, it reminded me of Christ saying, "Where two or more are gathered, there
Yeah,
I am."
yeah.
Because that essence of true holiness arises where those two waveforms meet in their harmony together.
Right. And each one witnesses the other's validation of the same truth.
And so it grows stronger.
Right, exactly. And then you can see it becomes
Yes.
and then if you keep
Yes.
adding to that, you start with 2 and maybe you add 3 and 4 and 10, it becomes a beacon because that resonance.
Go forth and multiply.
Exactly, that signal just it can't help but be broadcast to an even wider audience, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Right. Exponential.
Exponential, yes.
Well, so then we have to see that just as much as it's possible to speak heaven into existence by being truthful, by acting truthfully, by perceiving truthfully, by speaking truthfully, it's also possible to do the opposite of that. I think we don't have to look far to see what happens when we do that.
I think we shouldn't forget too that, underneath truth lies love. And so if you're speaking from a
Mhm.
place of love, speaking from the heart and acting from that place, you will tend to be more in alignment with the word. But you can see what happens when our darkness is activated by the speech of another, for example, in a crowd situation or a mob situation. Great harm can come about because if you have, say, a charismatic leader who is invoking something more demonic, and that's tends to start resonating or activating the demonic in other people, even if these are otherwise good people who would never intentionally do harm, at least they think so. I guess the inverse of what, any two come together in Jesus' name and there is love and
Mhm.
then it expands. People come together in hatred or find themselves persuaded by the beacon that hatred can
Yep.
become, then great harm can be caused.
Yeah. The interesting thing about demonic ideas is that they're always disguised as light. And so our tendency to perceive the demonic idea as something good that is happening. It's something that again and again keeps us from actually speaking the truth because we gather up together under these false banners of truth and support them and unite with them, and they gain momentum and energy,
Mhm.
but they don't represent anything truly good. They don't represent. So, for example, in different cultures or in different sects or different groups, there's different versions of what utopia is, like
Right.
what the ideal world, what the ideal society is, and those are often things that we strive for. But the very striving for those utopian ideals actually creates the opposite,
Mhm.
right? So there's a
Right.
way in which we're trying to achieve heaven with our utopian ideas,
Mhm.
but we actually create the opposite.
Yeah.
And this is what becomes so radically challenging about understanding the logos, the word, and understanding heaven is that it's, in a sense, it defies our limited ideas about heaven on earth.
I think if you were to ask most people what utopia means to them or what would represent utopia to them, it would be some conceptualization of being in an absolutely safe environment, um,
Yep.
where all needs are met. And under the guise of something like safety, you can justify all kinds of things. I want to live in a
Mhm.
safe country, therefore I must go to war with that country over there that feels like a threat. Or I
Mhm.
need to protect my property. As someone from a spiritual orientation, a monk is not going to is not going to kill someone to, maintain possession of his rice bowl or something. I mean, somebody who's connected with the truth, the logos, and is speaking and acting in alignment with that, understands that no harm can come to the body, therefore safety is not something to be defended, understands that property is not a component of happiness or security or validation and does not need to be defended. So you're not going to be easily
Mhm.
coaxed into or resonate with any expression
Yep.
that seeks to harm in order to defend those things. Boy, that was
Yeah.
long.
Well, no, I mean, I think, what we're starting to unfold here is that you can't speak and act the truth if you don't know what the truth is.
Good
And
point.
what we do is we create substitute truths.
Yeah.
In when we've lost touch with the truth, we create substitutes. And a good example of that is communism,
Mhm.
where it's this attempt at an ideal society, but it's a replacement for that truly safe haven or that place
Mhm.
where there truly is value and richness and
Mhm.
love and cooperation and all of those things. And so that's what we're often trying to do, as you said so nicely, is like we're trying to create heaven on earth, but we're trying to create heaven on earth in terms of our egoic or material experience, and it doesn't work. It
Right,
doesn't work.
right.
You can't do it. So we have to know heaven for what heaven is, rather than stumbling around in the dark trying to create what we think heaven might be.
It's remarkable to me, the farther we travel this path, how inverted our truth, what our apparent truth on earth actually is. When we're talking about a utopia, what we're really longing for is going back to the womb, that womb-like existence where everything is, on some very deep level, the longing for heaven, the longing for God, the longing for safety and security and just to be cared for and loved.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Oh, I love this. I love where this is going. I'm getting
and we think
excited.
we think that's something we can build out of money and, with the right kind of walls to keep certain things in and certain things out and all of our barriers. But so we think it's about the things and we think it's about the objects. And when in fact, the reverse is true, and that the true safety and freedom lies in attachment to none of those things and into actually being so true to what you really are that heaven is the inverse. Like heaven is the having everything taken away And it's really hard. I mean, you can see I'm stammering here because it's so hard to express this in words, but it's the emptiness we spoke of a few episodes ago. It's the silence. It's the love that is implied by those things that we're really after. But the human mind, and we still have this animal nature that we're all of us trying to evolve out of, or bound to evolve out of, that will try to fool us into thinking that we have to defend the den, and our mates um, and our ideas.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you said there that I want to pick up on. I don't know that I see us evolving beyond the animal, though I understand what you're saying. I see us more as contending with our animal nature, which I think amounts to basically the same point in some sense. Even great saints are bound to be tempted by animal nature and therefore
Yeah,
have to contend with it in some sense. You
right.
know, I totally appreciate and love what you had to say about heaven and stillness. And as you mentioned the womb, it brought to mind a whole different angle of this, which is that, and I think this characterizes two different angles of consensus reality. And it could potentially speak here about some of the powerful solution that's needed in our world. We are looking for the womb. We are looking for heaven, that point of safety. We are looking for the place where we are cared for and fed, and like an infant at the breast or in
Mhm,
the womb, where there is this atmosphere of warmth and safety. And where I think we get it wrong as human beings is we focus too much on our rights and our deservability of
mhm,
that,
mhm,
and we orient toward getting
mhm.
that rather than giving that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And so I
Mhm,
think that part of growing up and maturing, which means going vertical,
mhm,
getting in touch with the inner truth of our being, is becoming an adult. And when you're an adult, you're no longer looking to enter the womb again or suck at the breast again. You're looking to be the one who provides the womb
oh,
and
yeah.
does the breastfeeding.
Mhm,
And this is why you know that I'm constantly emphasizing personal responsibility and sovereignty,
mhm,
because what a lot of people are doing in their vision of heaven is they're still acting like the hungry child or the scared child trying to find the womb or the breast again.
mhm.
And that's not our role if we are here as the intersection of divinity and humanity. Our role is much like the Christ, which is to bring it into being,
Yeah.
not find shelter.
I'm fascinated by the symbolism of the cross in general, and using it in this context as the intersection between the spiritual and the human. That crux, at that point at the very center where they intersect, is so dynamic. Naturally, if you line up a human, it falls at the heart, right? The cross meets at the heart. The dynamism has to occur in the individual, because if you're trying to create heaven as part of a group, you're dispersing that outward. That responsibility lies with you, as you keep saying, but we will hook up with others in order to kind of sort of be loosely associated with it and not take full responsibility for
Yeah,
creating it ourselves.
right.
And admittedly, that is a great responsibility. I mean, that's kind of a really sobering and daunting concept when you come to terms with it, when you really truly see what that means.
Yep. Because you're no longer trying to create heaven in terms of this group or movement or this ideology or this narrative or this religion, or it is heaven is brought to earth right here, right now with me, how I speak, how I act.
In this moment, in this body, in this particular place, for lack of a better word.
X marks the spot. Yep.
X marks the spot.
Yes. The cross marks the spot. Yes.
This is pretty abstract. So I was just reminded of, I think you and I were talking one time about equal pay for equal work. And I said something like, you remember this? I said
Uh-oh.
something,
I think my connection's getting a little bit broken here.
oh no, I'm not going to debate you on that or anything, but
I'm just teasing.
I mean, you have a point of view about the effectiveness of movements that I didn't quite understand at first. I think we were talking about whether we needed an amendment for that or something. And I didn't get it at first until I realized that it's useless to fight these battles as kind of a class action suit in a way. Part of the reason that we, I think, rely on movements or groups to try and get things done is because it's so daunting for an individual to stand up in the face of an quote unquote oppressor and say, hey, this is not okay, and I would like my rights. And be willing to take the consequences of what that means, like to assume full responsibility for if I demand a raise and I don't get it, maybe to stay true to the logos
Mhm.
of my sovereignty, I need to
Mhm.
leave, you know,
Mhm.
instead of, and then enough people doing individual work like that over time creates change. Whereas when we rely on a movement, there's a diffuse responsibility, there's diversified action, and it's may seem effective superficially, but not quite the same thing.
Well, I think there's some really good points here. I do want to clarify something though,
Sure.
because
I don't want to misrepresent.
I'm not against equal pay for equal work, because to me, that is justice. And
Yes.
and I think our laws should reflect justice
Hmm.
in that way. So to the extent that our laws are meant to actually represent true justice, I'm absolutely in support of them. What I have an argument with is the notion of equality as most people try to define it.
Hmm.
You know, something I learned a few weeks back is that if you take the major characteristics of a person's life and you spread them out across six different dimensions,
Hmm.
at the point where six different dimensions that describe a person's life are articulated, there is not a single person on the planet who is exactly like you. So if you take your age, your sex, your work, your education, whether you're single or married, whether you have children, if you factor those things out to 6 points, you will
Hmm.
find that there's not a single person on the planet just like you. So
Hmm.
here's a problem: is that equality is something that we know as a deep part of our spiritual being, that each of
Mhm.
us has an innate value
Right.
as the intersection where heaven, where spirit and humanity meet. What we try to do is we try to achieve equality in only one or a couple arenas of our experience.
Mhm.
But even if we were to do that, our equality in the other areas of experience would still be not present. So the question is, do we actually have equality at that
Mhm.
point?
Mhm.
Now, my argument about equality is that the only equality we have is in the value and preciousness of our inner being, and that all other attempts at equality are attempts in line with what we're talking about. They're attempts to bring about that sense of a utopian world where
Mhm.
everyone is equal.
Mhm.
But every model that we look at with that shows that even if you could create a society based on those principles,
Mhm.
the equality would break down rapidly. For example, can I go on for a moment?
Please. Yeah.
For example, I think it was it Sweden? I can't remember. It's a Scandinavian country. They actually integrated laws that brought a greater sense of equality for men and women. I don't remember if it was pay. No, you know what it was? Is it was within specific job categories. And what the laws produced was actually the opposite of what they were going for. It actually created more division of roles, more division of job categories. It created the imbalance even further after the laws were instigated.
Why do you think that was?
Because when human beings try to implement their version of what heaven is, they get it
Mhm.
wrong.
Mm.
And we're so far removed from the logos and the patterning which informs our natural way of living here in a
Mhm.
heavenly way, that
Mhm.
every attempt we make to do it in our way botches it even further. It
Yeah.
confuses it even further.
Part of the problem might be, and like you said, if every human being is different, you're going to have equality in some areas and not others. And every human being is also at a different level of awareness. And so, what may seem perfectly just and reasonable to one person will bring up a whole lot of resistance in someone else who, yeah, we see this in the US right now, right? Who sees this as some kind of a betrayal of their heritage or their traditions or the way they were raised. And until they've had time to integrate whatever it is they're working with, it will feel like a demand or some kind of an unjust imposition. And so naturally you'll get a backlash. So that makes perfect sense that, yeah, things would get further. The wobbly wheel will go even farther out of balance when you try to overcorrect.
Right. And you can see all this that we're talking about, simply put, as an abdication of personal responsibility. In other words, it's like, here's the basic messaging within
Mhm.
most movements. I want heaven on earth. Now you do this.
Right. Right. We're gonna just impose it on the system and then
Yes, we'll
right.
create a system that will give us heaven on earth. No, can't be
Yeah.
done.
Well, once again, what we're talking about here is looking to get something from elsewhere rather than being the thing.
Seeking the tit.
Yeah, rather than demonstrating through your actions and your speech what you want to manifest.
Yes.
To use that word very carefully. What you want to manifest in the world, because if you live it in your life, if you speak it in alignment with the word, and then another does, and then it begins to radiate outward, just like with the pebbles in the pond, it will amplify, and then other people will be drawn into it by attraction rather than having to be hit over the head by it and
Right.
all the resistance and resentment that that would engender.
Right.
And that's the way we would create harm in the world, is by
Yep.
trying to impose truth in a way that's just not effective.
Yep. You know, many times in classes, I've mentioned where Gandhi says, be the change you wish to see. He doesn't say, think about the change you'd like to see. He doesn't say,
Mhm.
change the laws so that you get the change you want. He doesn't say, yell at other people to be the change. He says, be it, become it, manifest it, bring it into being. If there's something greater that you can foresee here that us human beings are capable of, get busy embodying it.
Yeah. And I think to a lot of people that sounds like such an ineffective way to do anything, but it's so powerful. I think we've all had the experience of encountering someone who was simply not in step with everyone else and is simply quietly going about their life in a way that's true and unafraid
Yeah.
and beholden to no one. That's so powerful. You can't help but sort of stop and cock your head to one side and go, what is that? What
Yep.
is that thing I'm sensing from this
Yep.
person? And why do I want it? Why am I
Yep.
drawn to that? And in that way, someone like Gandhi, these folks don't have to go out and advertise themselves.
Right.
They don't have to get on social media and say, hey, this is what I'm selling. Here's my philosophy. It's great. Come and join me.
Mhm.
That happens automatically.
Yes, when we encounter someone who embodies the word, the logos, it has this it's like a lighthouse, right? It's like in the
Yeah,
dark, you see a light, and it's like,
exactly.
ooh, let me go toward that. And
Yeah,
every great being that has walked this planet embodies that.
yeah.
And 2,000 years go by, we're still talking about Christ.
Mhm.
2,500 years go by, we're still talking about Buddha, because these people walked with that. They walked that. They were the logos in action. They were this embodiment of truth. And it's what our destiny is too. It's what we're here for. That's why each of us feels that we have a great purpose, but we can't put our finger on what it is.
Yeah. This is maybe a little off on a tangent, so we can follow it or not. But since we started talking about speech specifically, so there's like a vibrational force towards delivered either in love or in something that's not love that creates on its own. We're attracted to strong vibration, and we can be attracted to a strong loving vibration and want to follow that. But we're also fascinated by the dark side. So when,
Mhm.
angry and if you watch any Hollywood movies, with the explosions and the noise and the characters yelling at each other in conflict cells, in sex cells, so all of those things that, our darker impulses tend to notice.
Yeah, it brings to mind, like, I've had conversations with people that go something like this. Well, if I was in Nazi Germany, I would have never let that happen.
Right.
And here's the thing is that when, as you mentioned earlier, as a charismatic leader steps forward with a certain kind of energy and power behind what they have to say, the darkness in other people is going to resonate with that. And,
Exactly.
and the people who did terrible things in Nazi Germany were not just like evil people sitting around waiting to do terrible things. They were people who bought into a patterning,
Hmm.
right? And if we don't guard our mind against such patterning by keeping it true to the word, if we do not know how to follow the dictation of our inner being and follow it in such a way that we can speak it and embody it and act it out, we're going to become susceptible
Right.
to all sorts of. I mean, Carl Jung said it really well. He said that people don't have ideas, ideas have people.
Mm.
And, if you consider what that means, what it means is that mass ideas take power, they take energy, and that energy is human consciousness,
Hmm.
right? And so if we're not careful about what ideas possess our mind, we're going, in the name of heaven, we're going to create a lot of hell.
Right, right. And we all have different susceptibilities just based on our makeup. I think people have these, well, we have our shadow sides, the places in us where our needs have gone unmet, or, we haven't been willing to look at them. So they're sort of lying in wait to be invoked and seen and heard. And as you said, a charismatic leader can say something that to your darkness sounds perfectly reasonable. Like, this is the answer to the thing that's been troubling me that I wasn't quite aware of. And so it resonates on some level, and you respond to that. And there's like some kind of endorphin rush or some kind of feeling in the body that rises up and feels good, and it makes it feel right, even though, some part of maybe our rational mind can even recognize that it is not right. And I think that's one way that for things like the Ten Commandments or the yamas and niyamas come in handy, because no matter how advanced you are, you may come into a situation where there's a conflict, right? And it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what's right and what's wrong here? I can
Yep.
tell that there's a conflict between my ego
Yep.
um, and the truth, and I can't quite sort this out on my own. My mind is not capable of that. And you can maybe look to these guides to say, mm-mm, no, you're not allowed to go kill this person just because you don't like what they said, or
Yep.
whatever.
You just spoke an important part of the logos, which is the part where we need something bigger than ourselves. People,
Yeah.
this is why I think it's worthwhile to talk about atheism from time to time, because within the atheist mindset, there's this notion that you don't need a higher ordering principle in order to live here, but you
Mm-hmm.
do. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you think that you're in charge of creating reality and that you can create things any way you want, there's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely no difference between heaven and hell in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
You're not able to make a distinction between what is heavenish and what is heaven and what is hellish,
Right.
right? So we need the logos, we need that higher ordering principle to inform. Otherwise, not only are we the place of intersection where
Mhm.
heaven and earth meet, where heaven and humanity meet, but we are then that with an absolutely misguided principle
Right.
about what it means to create an ideal world here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're wrong. We're wrong. Just like this movement of technology to make everything technological in our world, we think we're doing something progressive. We think we're
Mm-hmm.
doing something that is evolutionary. But what is the cost it's having on our collective being,
Yeah.
right? That's why there's such a profound atheistic ethos within the technological sphere of life, because it's this notion that we can dispense with all higher order and
Mm-hmm.
create our own.
Right. Right.
You
I
know?
think also, just speaking of atheism, because I had an atheistic phase of my life as well, and at that time, I was under the impression that all I have to do is not hurt people, and I'm good. Except you don't know when you're hurting people. I mean, some
Yeah.
things are obvious, like hitting them or killing them or stealing from them. Those are all harmful, lying to them. But you come to see in spiritual work that there's the reverse conflict that comes up as well. So there are times when you maybe in order to act and speak in alignment with truth and with the logos, you are saying or doing things that may appear harmful. I'm not talking about killing people, obviously, but you may hurt someone out of love.
Uh-huh.
And how do we know the difference? in either case, right? You've got a conflict in atheism, you've got a conflict in a spiritual person, and without that higher ordering principle that you're discussing, there might not be a good way to tell the difference.
Exactly. Right. And in line with what you said, it's like, if we are truly atheist, if I was a true atheist, why is murder even bad? There's no reason to think it's bad if you're atheist.
Mhm.
I mean, there's no cause to actually believe that anything is negative or positive at all. I mean, we get our whole reference for what is negative and what is positive from the logos,
Right.
and we all know it intrinsically.
Yeah.
That's why an atheist says, I don't believe in God. It's like, okay, fine. Then why don't you kill somebody? If there's no such thing as God. But there's a natural feeling within even an atheist that
Mhm.
that is not the right thing to do. That's the logos. That's part of the patterning.
Yeah.
Something in
Yeah.
us knows that,
Yeah.
right? And so we can make arguments all day long about whether there's God or not God, but the
Mhm.
natural existence of an ethic, and Dostoevsky writes of that so elegantly in Crime and Punishment,
Mhm.
right? Where there's this character who thinks he's beyond these principles and right and wrong, so he kills somebody. And the
Mm.
rest of the story is his self torture
Yeah.
because he
Yeah.
couldn't escape that law. Sorry, we're on a whole different tangent now than we were intending to talk about, but anyway.
That happens. I have a good example, though, of something kind of a different angle on this, though, because we were talking about how responsibility it's located at the crux in the individual. And a really good representation of this in cinema. Maybe a character is being persecuted or is at risk for some kind of punishment, and there's a crowd. Some torment is being visited on someone. And then one person in the crowd finds their conscience and stands up and says, I am with him or her.
Hmm. Hmm.
And silence descends over the crowd, and everybody, focuses on this one person who dares to stand in truth against what the audience knows is an obviously bad thing happening to a
Yeah,
favorable character,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But then, that's powerful. That one person
Yes.
standing in truth all of a sudden changes the mood, changes what's happening in the room, because that's resonating with the truth in the other people, the other characters
Yeah.
in the crowd. And suddenly they're ashamed perhaps of what they were about to do.
Right. Because that demonstration of speech and action is that embodiment of heaven, and we're all waiting for it. We're all
Yeah.
waiting for someone else to do it. Someone else
Yeah,
step forward and save us here. Someone come forward
exactly.
and do the right thing here. Someone come forward and make this place better. Well, it's you. It's me.
Mhm,
It's us,
mhm,
you know?
absolutely.
And it's like, that's the thing, is like, that's what's so disturbing about this atmosphere of rights and privileges, where it's like there's this waiting for the system to change so that we can be what we're looking for. It's like, no, we need to stop waiting.
Oh, somebody wrote a song on that. Do you know that song, "Waiting on the World to Change"? I
Oh
forget who.
yeah, that's who is that? Is that Ben Harper?
I can't
No, it
remember.
was older than that. Ben Harper redid it, I think.
But, oh, that song always bugged me. Why are you waiting
Yes,
for you to
right,
change? What a
right.
passive and hands-off and kind of like, "Don't bother me," in my.
Well, it's like the ultimate form of laziness. It's like, you know, we're waiting for we're waiting for environmental change. We're waiting for political change. We're waiting for social change. We're waiting for our neighbor to change. We're waiting for the churches to change. We're waiting for schools to change. We're waiting. I mean, it's like we're waiting for everything to change. But
Mhm,
if we really put our heart to the task of understanding, what is it I really want to bring into being here?
mhm.
What are the core things that I am waiting for?
Yeah.
And once they're identified and recognized, which will put us in touch with the logos,
Mhm.
then we figure out how to speak and act those things.
And there's great power in simply behaving as if. Because as long as you're
Yes.
waiting on something else to change or someone else or some system, you're locating the crux of the cross outside,
Yes.
over there, in those people, that government, that group. And by creating the change in yourself, you're bringing it back to where it belongs, which is in the heart, you know, the crux of the human being. And that's the only place that this real change can
Yep.
take place.
That's how we give away our power all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
you're the cross over there. You need to make things better, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and you're right. So bringing it back home to where
Yeah.
where it actually is.
And I
Hmm.
truly believe, this is sort of loosely related, but I truly believe that speaking as if and behaving as if is part of the way we manifest heaven on earth.
Definitely.
Um, when you behave in a way, again, it's like the monk who simply floats through the crowd untouched because he's sovereign and can't be defiled, no matter what anyone does to his physical body. That creates an awareness. It creates a ripple of change. It creates an attraction, and enough people gather in his name in that way, then the world does change.
Yeah. We've gotten away from speech a little bit, and I think that a little bit at times we've gotten away from
Well,
speech, and
yeah,
I think
that's,
that
I wouldn't mind going back to speech
yeah,
because the way we speak, the words we choose, the tone we create, all of those vibrational aspects of speech, those words have a power and a resonance. And I don't know, this is just an off the cuff example, but I used to work right out of college. I worked at a TV studio on a morning show, morning news show. And so we all had headphones. And our director, who was like this 26-year-old guy, also just out of college, set the tone for the show. And so for a half an hour, we would all be communicating behind the scenes, while the newscasters were doing their things, but we would be talking about what was happening and directing each other. And he used the F word like every other word and just had the most foul mouth. And if something went wrong, he would call it an abortion. And it created this, it was funny at the time. I was, like I said, just out of college. I thought this was hilarious and it was fun, but it was also so toxic. And so it created this atmosphere of nastiness and contempt. And there wasn't a lot of love or truth coming through in what was being done in that studio. And it took me, after I quit that job a year later, it took me a long time to get that voice out of my head, to stop swearing myself and dropping F-bombs every 10
mm,
seconds because it had kind of woven itself into my thought patterns.
mm,
And so, we talk sometimes about the way that we think in language and the way that frames our world. That's a really good example of
yeah,
how my view of humanity and work and people in television and everything kind of got really distorted by that atmosphere that was created simply by the words
yep.
that were being spoken into a microphone by one person.
Right, just by one person, and let alone, all the online experience we have or the
Mm,
commercials we watch or the
mhm.
radio we listen to or whatever, right? Because the language that we think is original to our own mind is implanted. I mean, we get it
Yes,
from outside.
yes.
And that's part of this imperative toward truthful speech, or this yoga of speech, is that when we begin to speak the truth, we are empowered by it, we are elevated, we are opened, and it creates this whole other kind of atmosphere around us.
Mhm.
And if we simply repeat and parrot the language that's being given to us all the time, then we're just a product of the machine. I mean,
Right.
we literally are artificial intelligence embodied in physical form at that
Mhm.
point, right? Because we're
Mm,
just taking what has been given from this machine like culture and we're repeating it. And so to be the logos, this goes back to one of the points you made, to embody truthful speech, and the logos is in some sense to articulate what is unpopular, to articulate what is not what is not housed within consensus reality and its language. Let's think of that for a moment as speaking with inspiration, in spirit, right?
yeah.
The way that we can be inspired. Inspiration is the very essence of the logos
Mhm.
when it comes into speech and action.
Oh, that segues perfectly into something I was about to say, which is that the nature of truth and God and love is creative,
Yes.
and it is suppressed by those samskaras that are installed in our minds by the society around us. So, if you're glued to your devices 24/7 and engaging in online arguments, and how are you going to write a poem? How are you going to choreograph a dance, paint a painting, any of those things? As a writer, I've noticed, I mean, I didn't really even realize when I was younger and tried to write why I couldn't be as creative as I liked, and it was because I kept trying to work within the confines of the words that had already been installed.
Aha,
You know, I
yeah.
kept trying to, like, and I had watched a lot of I was a latchkey kid growing up, so I'd watched all kinds of television after school, and so I had, all these concepts of what reality was that were just not true, and they were saccharine and packaged and overly dramatized, and there was no room amid that, or there was no, like, inherent poetry to it that made any kind of sense
Yeah.
if I tried to work through it to get something on paper, and it was writers talk about writer's block a lot of time, and I think that's part of what it is those
Mm,
words. You're trying to come up with something fresh and original and let the divine speak through you, let the logos come through, and it's just that there's a barrier, there's a fence, there's a force field of all
okay.
these words you've consumed your entire life, and some of my most inspired writing has come at, like, 4 in the morning, or, when I woke up and was half asleep, and then all of a sudden the logos was there,
Yes.
and suddenly I understood.
Yes.
And had not just the truth, but the words to express it in.
Yes.
And there is such a difference between that kind of creativity and one that's just a hack job.
Yes. Right. Right. I mean, that's maybe that's what we could say here most about the yoga of speech and articulating the logos is that it makes us an artist. It makes us a vessel,
Yeah.
just like the painter or the poet or the musician who opens themselves so completely and so fully to let that informative creative impulse flood their mind and come out as their skill, whether it's
Mhm.
poetry or music or, gosh, public speaking or movie making or cooking
Yeah.
a meal or, whatever it may be. It's like that's the creative impulse that we're all looking for. We're all waiting for that.
Yeah. You know it when you see it or hear
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
There's a difference when someone is giving a speech, say, since you mentioned public speaking, and speaking from logos and speaking from love and truth, you feel it. It resonates.
Yes.
When someone is lying or trying to color reality in a way that's false, and manipulative, you feel that something's off.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know, like, the facts to dispute whatever's being said, you can feel that, nah, there's an agenda here. There's something that's not right.
Yep.
And if we can tune into those things, it gets us closer, I think, to knowing what the truth is, how to recognize it both in ourselves at the crux that we keep discussing, and also in those who are not maybe in alignment.
That's right. Yeah. I love the way you just put that because it brings it back to that point we made earlier, which is that if you're going to speak and embody and enact the truth, you have to know what the truth is. And
Yes.
that comes through a very discerning awareness of what the truth is,
Mhm.
and in order to understand that, we have to understand that. We have to come underneath the
Mhm.
influence of that logos and that patterning to be taught
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
difference. Yeah. I love the way you said that.
So, which brings me to how we recognize when we're dealing with truth and when we're not, because that's
Mm.
a skill that needs to be developed if you're going to grow up, if we're going to
Yep.
embody the truth
Yep.
and work and speak and behave only from there. Um, you can have the experience of someone who's telling you exactly what you want to hear. Maybe someone you're in a romantic situation with and they're speaking all the pretty words, and yet something doesn't feel right. And I've
Right.
heard you say before that the logos feels good. It feels
Yes.
true and
It
right in
is
the
good.
body. Yeah.
And God saw that it was good. It is good. It is the very essence of good. That's it. That's how we identify it.
Mhm.
And if you wanna know the difference between the good and see, this gets difficult because we tend to think that our interpretation of good makes something good, and that's not true,
Yeah.
right? And so a truly discerning mind will be able to discern the difference between truly good and a manufactured
Mhm.
good,
Apparent good, yeah.
right? Apparent good, right? And I mean, I think there's no better way to truly begin to discern truth than to study the words of those who are truthful.
Mm.
If you study the masters because they were the ones who spoke the truth, or you study the artist or the painter or the pianist, and you
Mhm.
really understand what's being articulated there, that quality of discerning awareness develops quite
Yeah.
potently,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, there's beauty to it. That's why
Yeah.
an inspired piece of music feels so powerful.
Yep.
in the body. You listen to the Messiah,
Yep.
and it resonates, and maybe you don't know why, but
Yep. Beauty is another good indication that truth is present. But even there, like a true discernment about what real beauty is. Because real beauty will bring you into an elevated state versus a false beauty, which may be intriguing or fascinating or, tantalizing, but it doesn't take you beyond yourself.
yeah, there's that kind of packaged beauty
Yeah.
that looks familiar, and so maybe it feels
Yeah.
okay from that standpoint, but it doesn't have a power to it.
Right.
And this reminds me of, I think I've told you this story before, but I went to the San Francisco Museum of Art, SF MoMA, and they had a Jackson Pollock exhibition. Now, you wouldn't look at some of his paintings and think, "Oh, that's conventionally beautiful." It's all flowers and rainbows, because they're not. They're chaotic. They're messy. They're just deeply weird sometimes. But I stood in front of this canvas that was about, gosh, it was huge. It must have been 16 or 18 feet wide and maybe 10 feet tall. I may be overestimating, but it was a big canvas. And I stood in front of it, and it was very dark and just all scribbles, mostly black. And I don't know what it was, but I burst into tears. There was such passion and love and anguish in it. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, here I go again, right? Just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like 20 years later, and it still resonates.
Yep.
I don't even know the name of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
I know nothing about its history. All I
Yep.
know is that it just vibrated with something that just struck me.
Yes.
So it was true. It
Yes.
had to be true.
Yes. Yes. I have a good poem to accompany this now.
Oh, good. Good.
Can I
Great.
read it?
Please.
Okay. It's Rumi, uh, one of those who's maybe most talented at, doing just what we're talking about. What was said to the rose that made it open was said to me here in my chest. What was told to the cypress that made it strong and straight? What was whispered the jasmine, so it is what it is. Whatever made sugar cane sweet. Whatever was said to the inhabitants of the town of Chigil in Turkestan that makes them so handsome. Whatever lets the pomegranate flower blush like a human face. That is what is being said to me now. I blush. Whatever put eloquence and language, that's happening here. The great warehouse doors open. I fill with gratitude, chewing a piece of sugar cane, in love with the one to whom every that belongs.
Oh my God. I'll be destroyed for the rest of the day now.
What a beautiful destruction, huh?
Yes, yes, definitely. Very true.
Yep.
Thank you for that.
Yep. Thanks for listening to this episode of Into the Mystery. We hope you gained something useful. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can go to our websites. Mine is at adivajra.org, adivajra.org, or visit Rishika's at interdimensionalyoga.com. If you have questions or topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes, be sure to drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.